the building of the private practice that I wanted has forced me to do the things that I'm scared of over and over and over. So I sort of have built this muscle. So when there are things that happen that are not related to that, I have something to draw upon. Oh, I've done this before. I've walked through this fire that terrified me and I've survived.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Marielle Berg, a private practice entrepreneur in the Bay Area. Marielle is a therapist with a specialty in dialectical behavioral therapy, and she's also a practice building coach. Listen as she talks about facing her fears and building her business. Welcome, Marielle. Thanks for being on Therapist Clubhouse.
Well, hi, Annie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're here. I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurial journey. And I've known you for a long time, so I'm excited to share you with my listeners. So you've got a small group practice and you specialize in providing DBT and couples therapy. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice? So starting with how long you've been in private practice?
So I've been in private practice since 2009, so that's 8 years.
How did you get clear on wanting to provide DBT? Because I'm thinking the people who benefit most from DBT are people who a lot of times many therapists are really scared to work with, sometimes people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and the kinds of people that therapists feel like they don't work well with or they don't help effectively.
You know, it was really through the training and my own learning. I love to train and have taken a lot of different trainings. And I was searching for some kind of way at the time before I took the DBT training. I was working a lot with eating disorders. And I was searching for something more concrete or another way to help those folks. And so I signed up for a very intensive DBT training through Behavioral Tech, which is a training institute founded by Marsha Linehan, the creator of DBT. And I was just blown away by the quality of the training and the learning there. And it really shifted the whole way I work and the whole way I think about folks who struggle with BPD, as we call it in the DBT world, short for borderline personality disorder, whether they meet the full criteria for BPD or they just have some traits, or just folks in general who struggle with regulating their emotions.
Yeah, I remember when you got back from that training, you were just so on fire about DBT, and then that just kind of hasn't let up since.
This is true. Kind of like it changed everything. So if you had told me 5 years ago this is what I would be doing, I wouldn't have believed you. But yeah, really, it's been a great fit for how I think about the work, for the folks I want to work with, and the way I want to work.
Mm-hmm. What do you like about it day to day?
Well, first of all, just to sort of back up, the piece you said that I work with a population that other therapists can be frightened to work with, and I've thought a lot about this, and I think that's in large part due to a lot of stigma and the resulting shame. So there's so much kind of negative noise out there around this particular diagnosis. And I think that's quite damaging. So I feel really passionate about reducing that stigma. And, the large majority of people I work with are quite high functioning in their lives. They just struggle more privately with some kind of addictive or compulsive behavior that they might use to regulate overwhelming emotions or confusing emotions, or they really struggle in their interpersonal relationships with setting boundaries that feel right, or maybe even believing that they can have those kind of boundaries. And just to add another piece to that, when I think about the shame and the stigma that can surround this diagnosis, at least when Marsha Linehan was writing her first book on DBT for working with borderline personality disorder, she was just studying women. And I don't know what the numbers are in terms of diagnoses now between men and women, but I think about the impact of misogyny and how expressions of anger in women are so pathologized. And I think that's part of the mix of what goes into the stigma around it.
And do you think that for therapists, when therapists are feeling like they're not effective with someone, that sometimes that's a time when we might inadvertently start stigmatizing that person?
I could imagine that could happen, yes, inadvertently, where we get overwhelmed ourselves or confused or kind of start to feel ineffective.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, well, why isn't this client is difficult?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
because this
Yeah.
works. I'm a good therapist. This works with all of my other clients. I think having all of those skills that you have with DBT, I'm imagining shifts some clients who you've worked with from feeling like I'm not quite sure how to help this person to feeling like, yeah, I can really see a path for this person.
Absolutely. Yes. And so people can come to me after they've had a lot of different kinds of therapies that they have felt have not been effective or not sort of effective enough to get them to make the changes they'd like to make in their life. So I feel like when they come to me and they present with a certain set of issues that they're struggling with, I really feel like, okay, you're in the right place and we have a course for you.
And when you first made that change and started focusing a lot more on DBT, was that scary? Was that a scary business decision?
It was. I think the whole idea of kind of just, focusing in a more narrow area. And I hear this from other folks too. I was worried about, are those the only referrals I'm going to get? And I like variety in my caseload. And there's a bunch of different kinds of personalities and issues I like to work with. And what I have found where there's certainly there's a portion of my practice that is DBT and couples therapy that I get referrals from a whole bunch of different avenues, and my caseload is quite diverse. So I think that was a fear I had around niching, and it hasn't panned out that way.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons, like I haven't mentioned this in this interview yet, but you are working with me in coachingwithannie.com as a consultant. So therapists can hire you and work with you and get your help with looking at their practice and helping them build their practice. And I think that experience that you've had of choosing a niche, going after it, building your practice, and finding that, you still have a really diverse practice. I think that really allows you to help other therapists do the same thing.
And I think as we're talking, another thing that is coming to mind is I had feelings of, if we want to call it imposter syndrome, but just like, can I really put myself out there? Like, when do I get to call myself an expert, or when do I really get to claim this expertise? And feeling like, oh, do I kind of have to wait till I'm retired and I have 35 years under my belt before I get to call myself, a specialist in this area? And I was like, no, like I know enough where I am right now, and I can put that out there.
And you can help people. How'd you get through that? How did you realize that you've got what you need to help people right now?
When I was first starting putting it out there more, I don't know if I got through it so much, rather than I didn't let that stop me. So now I'm on the other side. But the thing that I have found over and over again in building my business to where it is now is that doing things that scare me makes me stronger. So I don't have to wait till I'm not scared, because if I listen to my fears, I won't do much.
Yeah. And so it's partly not waiting until you're ready, but doing it kind of before you're ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just pushing myself beyond the area where I'm comfortable.
Yeah. It's one thing I love about you is you just keep doing that over and over again.
Yes. It's sort of, a guiding principle for my, for business building. And it's trickled over to other areas of my life. So it's really changed things for me.
Oh, interesting. So having to do that in your business, or deciding to do that in your business, has made other things feel more possible?
Well, the sort of the practice or the building of my business, or the building of the private practice that I wanted, has forced me to do the things that I'm scared of over and over and over. So I sort of have built this muscle. So when there are things that happen that are not related to that, I have something to draw upon. Oh, I've done this before. I've walked through this fire that terrified me, and I've survived.
And what are some of the things that come to you when you think about scary things you've had to do to build your business?
I remember, a few years ago when I was working with you and I was putting the word out about a group I was starting. It was just so scary to again, like, claim that, like, oh, I know something about this. I'm holding myself out as someone who has some expertise in this area, it felt really, had all these kind of voices in my head of you can't do that, or who do you think you are, things around sort of shame and exposure. And I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. So I think it's been like that all along the way. And as I've done that, it gets easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's always a new edge that you take yourself to. Like I'm thinking for you, for a lot of people, for me, there's that moment in the beginning of marketing where if you're doing any kind of email marketing, like just announcing a group, that moment of pressing send.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it mostly doesn't freak me out anymore. And mostly it's actually like scheduled to get sent. So I don't even necessarily think about it the moment it's sending. But man, that is a muscle that has to get developed.
Yes, absolutely. It's nice that it's scheduled for you now so you don't have to confront that scary moment. But I also like to think about, or when I've had times when I've been scared to press the send button or put something out, is to think about how it is when I'm on the receiving end, when other therapists do that. And, often I'm really grateful to hear about the resource. Like, oh, that sounds so perfect for XYZ client, or I want to keep this in mind because at some point I might need to contact this person for a referral. So it helps me with my practice.
That's really good. That's a really good reframe. And even if sometimes someone doesn't even open your email, they still might see it sitting there and think, oh, that's good. That's a good reminder.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Even if they don't engage with it much, or if I get emails, people advertising things that doesn't resonate, or I don't have anyone in my caseload who I think could benefit, it's still, it gets filed away in my brain and I kind of move on. But there is never the kind of judgment that I sometimes fear that others might have about me when I put things out there. I never think, who do they think they are?
Yeah, that's so true. You can't imagine thinking like, well, how much training do they have to be offering something to help clients? My God.
Absolutely. And it's just good, I think, to remember that when we get in that place of fear.
How do most of your clients find you?
So through different avenues. For this, I run 2 DBT skills group, and a lot of people find us online for that, or they've been referred by their therapist. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the folks are through referrals by colleagues.
When they find you online, do you think they're searching specifically for a DBT skills group or therapist? Usually.
Mm-hmm. They've heard about DBT, someone's recommended it, that it might be helpful for them, or they've been exposed to it in another setting and they want to continue.
And you have a blog that you've contributed to, or that you've written quite a bit. Do you sometimes have people coming in talking about the blog?
Yes. So in the blog, people sometimes are searching for borderline personality disorder. So DBT is great for kind of anyone who struggles with regulating their emotions, but it was originally developed for folks with BPD. So sometimes people will read something in my blog and be really grateful that I'm kind of normalizing and working on destigmatizing it, and will say, you know what, I think this fits me, and I want help in this area. Mm.
And usually a lot of the other stuff they're going to find out there is going to be so much more scary and hopeless.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And now you've got a small group practice. How did you decide it was time to expand?
Really 2 reasons. I mean, the first was I was just, sort of had a overabundance of inquiries that I couldn't kind of handle myself, and didn't have a whole ton of resources in terms of referring folks. And it also had a lot, and probably this was the first thing that planted the seed, to do with the DBT model, where there's a consultation team component to it that's necessary to do the work to sort of adhere to the model. And I was part of an online international team. And I thought, I really want something local in my community. I would like to be meeting with people face to face. So why don't I build that? Mm-hmm. So that's how it started.
And that first part that you mentioned of having an overabundance of inquiries, I'm thinking of that as like when you were saying 5 years ago, you wouldn't have believed that you'd have this focus. Like I'm imagining 5 years ago or however long ago that you might have been surprised that you would have that problem.
Yes, you're right.
It's like when you start in private practice, or for so many people for quite a while, it can be hard to build up enough inquiries. And then, you went over the top where you're like, what do I do? What do I do?
Now, a new set of problems.
Yeah.
How do I handle this? Yeah. I mean, a lovely problem to have.
And so in that overabundance, what did you find was the right amount of work for you? Like how many sessions in a week do you really like to have in your therapy practice?
I also run 2 groups. So if I add those in, I think I'm most comfortable sort of in the low 20s in terms of like clinical hours that I do per week. I've done more and I've done less. And I think the low 20s is my comfort zone.
And what's your fee?
My fee is $200.
And for your groups?
For the groups, it's $80 per session.
How do you feel about those fees right now?
Right now, I feel pretty good about them. My current fee I've had for a few years, and it feels quite comfortable. And at some point soon, I'll probably be raising that. But that's something I also needed to grow into. I know when I first raised my fee and started talking about it, I would kind of like be tripping over the words a bit. So it took a while to get comfortable saying that number.
Mm-hmm. And was it the same thing as with those other steps where it just took doing it to get comfortable, or was there something else that you found helpful?
I think that just doing it was key, and not kind of comparing myself to others. I think, and related to that, it wasn't that it was, it got easier quickly talking to prospective clients about my fee and harder talking to colleagues. Because it brings up, of course, everyone's stuff. And so, at the time, I'm sure it's changed, but the colleagues around me, not all of them were charging a similar fee. So that part felt harder to navigate. And with folks that I could talk openly about it, it was great. And it could bring us closer. And with some other people that felt just challenging.
Like there was some weird barrier that went up.
Yeah. I didn't like that.
Yeah. I remember one time telling someone my fee, and this was a long time ago, so I don't remember what my fee was. I think it was something like $120 at the time. But I remember a colleague who has a lot more experience than me asking me my fee, and I said it, and she looked like she was going to faint. It just put up this huge wall between us for a moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know what you're talking about. And now here you are like talking about your fee on a podcast.
I know.
Really,
yeah. So that's, I've grown into it.
Yeah. When you think about your practice over the years, have you had a low or scary moment that comes to mind? And if you do, how did you get through that?
I mean, I know I've had several low or scary moments, some that were longer lasting and some just shorter, like it's been a rough week, or, inquiries are down, or I'm feeling discouraged by the work or things like that. So I think this is just a part of the process of doing this kind of work and being in business for yourself. But I do remember distinctly before I shifted my focus to DBT, and I think I was pulling back then on the marketing that I had been doing because I was focusing so much on my training that I had a few months where my numbers really dipped, and I was looking at, adding a part-time job and other ways to bring in income, and started to really doubt whether private practice was going to be for me long term.
I'm so glad that you stuck with it.
Me too.
What do you think made you stick with it?
I had, there was something in me that really wanted to see it through, and I knew that if I kind of let it go at that point, that I would have regretted it, that I wouldn't have felt that I'd given it my all. So I thought, okay, before I do this, let me really give it my all and fully invest in building this. And then if it doesn't feel right or it doesn't go well, then I can move on to something else and feel satisfied that I gave it 100%.
And if you could time travel all the way to the start of your private practice, what would you tell the Marielle of that time?
Well, a few things. I think one is because I'd like to train and I'd like to study and read, that I would want to tell her, like, you could be the best therapist you know how to be, and, read all this stuff and learn about theory and technique and train and have this wonderful toolbox, but none of that matters if no one knows how to find you. If you don't have sort of the right kind of mindset to be an entrepreneur. At the time, I wasn't even thinking of myself in those terms. And if you don't have the kind of business skills to get what you do out there, like, all that learning is for naught. It's not going to help. I want her to know that.
Okay. So you're having a little bit of tough love for your past self. Like you got to learn this stuff. You got to get yourself out there. Yeah.
Yes. I think I'd also want her to know, or anyone who's sort of starting, that it does take work. Mm-hmm. Like it's not the kind of thing. I think I had this idea in the past that some people just have what it takes to make it in private practice, and I don't have that. Like some sort of magical quality. Who knows what it was? And I didn't know the piece of the people who can really make it in private practice are investing a lot in it.
Yeah, and that can feel kind of like a secret.
Mm-hmm,
it just looks like some people are just successful and some aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
And so that's one reason, even though you're so busy with your practice, like, I'm so happy that you're also helping therapists with me and helping other people really ground into that knowledge of, this is just about learning and taking steps, and it's not a magical secret.
Right. Yeah. I think that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to work under your umbrella, coaching therapist, because I felt so empowered through the work that I did with you, with building my business skills and working on my mindset, that I thought, I really don't want other people to have to kind of be, fumbling blindly in the dark, or thinking that there's kind of something wrong with them because they're not getting it. That these are a concrete set of skills and a way of thinking that we need, that, 99% of us don't get anywhere else unless we actively seek it out.
And how do you balance the roles of being the therapist in your business and also the CEO?
That's, I feel, a work in progress as my business is growing, and I'm needing to be more in the CEO role as I have this small center that I'm building. And I actually, and this was also part of the impetus to want to help coach people, that I have found that I really love the business side of it, that gets to work a different part of my brain and gets me moving more quickly than I might or internally thinking and moving more quickly, versus my work in session, which I also love, but as a clinician, there's a more kind of slowed down, deeper thinking part of me that gets activated. So I don't know if I quite answered the question, but I like the difference between the two, and I really appreciate having both in my life.
Yeah. And it's like they're two parts of your superpowers, having, the strength in both of those areas and getting to really use them. How do you do it in terms of time?
Again, that's shifting as I'm growing. So I'm needing to spend more time in the CEO kind of mindset, or the manager director mode. Mm-hmm. So that means pulling back a little bit from my client load and not having, more than that low 20s, and really trying to stick to that, even though there can be a draw to see more folks. But to really remember that I need to have time to kind of think and strategize and do administrative stuff. And if I want this, if I want the business to be strong.
Yeah, there's sort of this developmental stage, I feel like. Not that things are 100% linear, but I feel like that issue you're talking about of having to force yourself to pull back from clinical hours in order to nurture this vision, I think is something that it's sort of a problem, like we were talking about earlier, that seems like such a great problem to have. Like, you've got to take less clients, but it's sort of a growing pain of, okay, so I want to, like in your case, I want to build this really quality center that provides something unique for these clients. And that means I've got to say no to something. That can be hard to get used to doing.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that it's easy for me even now.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that helps is when I think about short term versus long term. That, a year from now, where do I want to be with my business? And pulling back is really in services of the longer term goals, and having faith that if I invest the time in that something will take shape.
I'm imagining then when you have that figured out, that's got to make it so much easier to make the decision in the moment to like refer someone out or refer someone to someone else in your center.
Yes, because there's this longer term goal that I'm working towards.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And having some faith. And if I put the hard work in, it will, what I want will take shape. And if it doesn't, also, it's not the end of the world. I'll figure something else out.
Yeah. You can always pivot.
Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes we'll have a vision of where we're going, and then all of the steps that we take to get there will be useful, even if we realize before we get there, oh, I want to actually do something kind of different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Like, for me, I had a small couples therapy center, and I just recently let go of it and, handed it to someone else. And for me, that was a pivot where all of the work that I had put into building that and to, growing it, it's still really valuable to me. There aren't any steps that I took that I regret in any way. So sometimes, there's just pivots along the way.
Right. And that maybe was something that you hadn't imagined or quite planned for, but then seems like it's happened at the right time for you.
Yeah. So Marielle, will you join me for a listener question?
I'd love to.
Listener question.
Okay, so this person asks, I hear you and your guests encouraging people to choose a niche. I'm open to trying to do that, but not sure how to decide. I work with a few different populations and don't know how to narrow it down. Any ideas?
So I have so many more questions that I feel like if I could ask could help me answer this more accurately, but I'd want to know what the different populations were or are, in case there's some kind of umbrella for them, for those, those folks, like people with anxiety or midlife men or whatever it might be, because that could be one way of thinking about it. And also just to kind of go back to what I'd said earlier, that when I niched down, it wasn't that those were the only referrals I got, that there was still a fair amount of variety in my practice. And I imagine this could be the same for this person who's asking this question, that if they choose one or two areas of focus, that people in their life and colleagues will still know that they do this other thing that might be seemingly unrelated, and they'll still get those referrals. Maybe not quite as many, but they'll still come in.
Yeah, I would completely ask the same questions, Marielle. I guess it makes a lot of sense that we work together. Yeah, because maybe those niches really do combine into a niche. It would be interesting to explore that. And then also, we were just talking about pivoting. Like Marielle has gone in this direction of creating this center and focusing on DBT, and it is like she's staying on fire with it, and it's great. And if, like for you, Marielle, if you had started building that and then discovering, I'm done with DBT, like that would be okay.
Yes.
And you would have all these skills that you could apply to something else. So, if you, listener, decide to go with a niche, and I would encourage you to do that, to explore that and to put your energy in one direction, if you can, if you're comfortable, then you can always change your mind. You can always pivot.
Just as we grow and change, our practices will grow and our focuses will change, and that's to be expected. Mm-hmm. So you're not, once you choose a niche, that's not what you have to do for the rest of your work life. You can expand, you can tweak it. Yeah, absolutely.
Marielle, what's it like to work with you as a coach?
I think that when people work with me, they get a really nice mix of the coach and the therapist in me. And I know they get that with you as well. When I first started looking for coaches, I reached out to coaches who weren't therapists, who couldn't understand the particulars of our business and things that we could do or ways that we were restrained, and also didn't have the kind of attunement to emotional and mindset issues, which I think are foundational pieces when you're trying to build a business. And so I just think that that mix is really nice for therapists who want to grow their business selves, that there's an awareness of all the kind of, it's not therapy, but all those kind of issues that we bring to building our businesses, as well as the piece around the very practical piece of like, what do I do when? How do I make this decision? So I think it's a really lovely mix of bringing in the best of both worlds of therapy kind of and coaching.
And I'm thinking when people work with you, just knowing you, they absolutely get both. And sometimes people might be surprised that they might start a session with you thinking, all right, I've got to make this marketing plan and I've got these 5 questions. And then they'll get those out of the way, and then they might be surprised at the mindset breakthroughs that need to come up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes growing our businesses is so closely related to growing ourselves.
Yes. Yes. That the two sort of go hand in hand.
Yeah. So I want to encourage listeners to check you out, Marielle, at coachingwithannie.com, and they can click on about and learn more about you there. And then I also want to know, where else should people check you out and throw compliments at you?
That's very sweet. They can go to my center website, which is bayareadbtcc.com.
Thank you so much, Marielle.
Thanks, Annie.
Today's snark moment
is
about imposter syndrome. I hate it. I hate what it does to me, and I hate what it does to the therapists I work with. You do something brave, you put yourself out there in a new way, and then most of the time you get this sick feeling like, who do I think I am to do this? Or, when did I earn the right? And it's just imposter syndrome. Then you get over it and you start feeling confident again. And then you get yourself to a new edge. You try something new once again, and imposter syndrome comes back. So it sucks. I hate it. You hate it. The thing is, I have started to also see it as a good sign. Whenever I start getting that feeling of being a fraud or, who am I to say this? Who am I to do this? I also know, that means I'm doing something at my edge and I'm growing, and that's a good thing. And I've encouraged therapists who I work with to think of it this way too, to think of imposter syndrome as an annoying thing to deal with, but also as a really good sign. So maybe you can give that a try as well. Thanks for listening to Therapist Clubhouse. If you're ready to bust through your own limits and build your practice, Marielle and I can help. Check out how at coachingwithannie.com. I'll see you next week.